SolidWorks is an awesome tool in the 3D drafting world, and some of its features will be showcased as I reverse engineer this LEGO battle car. First, I disassembled the car and determined the essential pieces that needed to be drawn in order to model the car in SolidWorks. Here is a sneak preview of the completed SolidWorks parts. The goal is to build 2 battle cars that will duel in a SolidWorks animation, but all of the LEGO pieces will be needed before starting an assembly. First, I tackled the structural members of the car. These members have a symmetric plane, so I started with the general shape split in half. Then one hole was drawn in the corner and patterned vertically and horizontally. This allows for the number of holes to be easily adjusted. Next, a similar approach was taken with the dog bone shaped cavities. Lastly, the part was mirrored to complete it and make it the correct width. Equations were then added so that the number of holes could be easily changed with another display state. That part was then modified to include plus-shaped holes on each end for 2 further structural member configurations. I was even able to make a skinny part by simply changing the thickness of the general shape at the top of the design tree. Next, I drew the bevel gear. Starting with the main body to establish the gear's mounting location, I then created one rough tooth. Material was removed from the tooth to match the needed geometry, which even included a parting line draft feature. Lastly, that tooth was patterned around the main body to complete the gear. The next piece is a double female connector. One sketch was used to create the main body, and then fillets were added while the long edges were still intact. Then, the perpendicular connection body was added and a hole was cut through the part. From this part, a second connector was able to be made by splitting it with a circle sketch and rotating one of the end bodies 90 degrees. Next was another female-style connector. I again started with the body that contained the plus-shaped connector and used cuts to modify it so that I had complete control over the remaining geometry. Then, the 2 circle connectors were added and holes were cut as needed. By putting the circle connectors in last, it was easy to update their sketch to 1 connector instead of 2 for another configuration and part. The last connector tackled was a male-female connector. The male end was drawn first, and then the female geometry was placed on one of the ends. This allows the length of the male end to change independently. Lastly, the strengthening rib was added. The next part is one of the ground engaging wheels. As before, I started with a connection point for the part, and then added a base for the wheel geometry to mount to. The wheel was then built from a profile sketch with a revolve feature. The wheel lugs were added last because they are simply aesthetic on this piece. Next is the rubber wheel, which is the hammer on the end of the arm of the car and the knob that is turned at the back of the car to make the arm move up and down. I started by revolving the general shape of the wheel and then making 1 cut for the tread pattern. This cut was then revolved around the wheel and mirrored to the other side. To correct the tread pattern, the wheel was split in half and one of the bodies was rotated slightly. Then, the inside of the wheel was shaped with some cuts and the addition of the connection point. Lastly, the LEGO emblem was embossed on the side of the wheel. The final major part is a wing-shaped piece. I started with 3 cylinders that represented the main body of the wing. Then, fins were added on either side of the major cylinder. Then, planes were used to cut angles onto the bodies of interest. Next, the large cylinder body was split in half so that the top and bottom could be cut independently. Strengthening ribs were added to the connections part of the wing, and then fillets were added to smooth off the hard edges. Finally, the wing was mirrored, and left and right-hand wings were created in two separate display states. From the drawing, a cool rendering was made of the wing piece. Also, I made two simple pieces that will be needed for when the car is assembled in the end. To recap, the goal of the project is to take these SolidWorks Lego pieces and assemble them into a car like this one. Then, two cars can be used in a SolidWorks animation to simulate a battle car duel.